Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Intuitive Awakening. My name is Antonia Dodge.
And I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And we really want to, the first thing that we want to do before anything else is we want to thank you for joining us in this program. Whether you're watching it live, whether you're watching a pre-recorded version, one of the most important components to what we do is we are literally trying to start a movement. In fact, we believe we're starting a movement. We believe we're starting a movement of not only people understanding themselves, but understanding each other. And one of the most important components to Intuitive Awakening, even though we're only talking about a certain segment of the population that's intuitive, is that this is a massive investment for anybody who has chosen to purchase or chosen to join us in this program and in this product. The reason why is, even in, if you've found us through multiple different avenues or platforms, there's nothing specific or concrete that Intuitive Awakening promises. This is not a wealth generation program. This is not a find your best lover program. This is not drop 10, 20 pounds program. This is something that's a little more esoteric than that. But it's also something that goes more into the heart of who we are and how we see ourselves as individuals and how we identify ourselves. And the reason why that's such a major investment is that not only on the micro level does it create health in an individual, it creates health in you because you learn to understand and accept yourself more. And one of Joel's favorite quotes is, "The rising tide raises all ships." So you become a rising tide. You become a better version of yourself as you invest in yourself as an intuitive. But the second component is that on a micro level, it increases the health of everybody around you. The rising tide raises all ships. So as you rise up, so do the people around you rise up.
But yeah, you're right. Actually, it is. We were talking about this before the program started. It's a lot like, anytime you make a change in your life, that ripples out to the people around you naturally. Mm-hmm. And as intuitives, not only are we hoping that you personally will awaken your own intuition, but you'll be an inspiration to other intuitives that see you do that, and an inspiration to other people that may not be intuitive, that will still be inspired by giving themselves permission and freedom to express themselves fully. Mm-hmm. And, just like any movement in the past, intuitives have kind of been on the forefront. Again, you as an intuitive are on the forefront of something that's cutting edge, something that's brand new, that as you awaken to on that macro and micro level, you're going to see some big changes, hopefully, in the world. And we'd love to see that movement of intuitives taking that next leadership movement together forward. Yeah,
so what we're doing is we're facilitating, we're co-creating and co-facilitating a new world, basically. As intuitives recognize who and what they are, regardless of what it is that you want to get out of this program. Maybe you just want to get some more self-acceptance, some more self-permission. Maybe you want better relationships with the people around you, with your family members or a mate, a spouse, with your children. Maybe it's that you just want to be able to understand your boss a little bit more and find ways to communicate to them. Or maybe you're here because you really believe that there's something inside you that was meant to make a big impact on the world. Regardless what it is, it kind of doesn't matter. All of those things are ways to move and push society forward in growth. And so you're investing not just in yourself, but you're investing in basically everyone.
Yeah. And one of the things that's really exciting about this is you're here right now joining this program probably in a very different way than other people who are joining this program. You kind of came about it in a way that was not typical, let's put it that way. I love using the example from the movie The Matrix. If you haven't seen this movie, it's a fantastic movie. You should watch it. It's a great kind of intuitive awakening metaphor for how intuitive awakening happens. Often, so in the movie, there's this main character, Neo, he's a computer hacker, and he's kind of dabbling with some code, and he's trying to find out, he has this inkling that there's something more to reality and his experience of reality than what he's actually physically experiencing day to day. And so he's searching and he's looking, and he tries to step out, and he gets, the authorities or the people that are kind of in control of stuff knock him down. And finally, through searching and discovery, he comes into someone who tells him, hey, there is another way to see reality, and here's some ideas on it. Obviously, there's a famous scene where he's presented with two pills, to take one pill or the other. One will just erase memory, he gets to go back and live his normal life, and the other pill, the red pill, he swallows, and he gets to go down the rabbit hole and really understand what it is to see this new reality that has been there all along, and he always kind of knew it in the back of his head. But now his eyes are opened, and he sees, oh, I've got language, I've got things like frameworks around this new reality I'm seeing. Wow, I always kind of knew it, but I got to it in a way that is so powerful and so opening. And I think that's a really good metaphor for kind of what will probably be happening for you as you do this. You probably got here through some exploration, through some questioning, and now all of a sudden you're here and you're going to get some language for this intuitive awakening that's going to happen for you.
Yeah. So let's talk about what an intuitive awakening is.
Yeah.
All right. How do we define an intuitive awakening? Well, our observation has been that there's been a dynamic that's been playing out for eons. All right. There's a dynamic that's been playing out between two groups of people. Now, obviously, that's a very bald oversimplification. Yeah. But for the purposes of the conversation, let's take people and divide them into two different styles. And these two different styles have always had a push-pull relationship with each other. That's a good thing, and we'll talk about why that's a good thing a little later. However, because there's been this push-pull relationship, because there's been this sort of misunderstanding between the two styles of people, there's been a lot of personal havoc that's been created around it. It interrupts individual relationships, it interrupts people's ability to accept themselves, and it really tragically interrupts the individual's ability to bring their greatest self forward. Now, our theory, and it's just a theory, is that intuition is one of the newest evolutionary technologies on the scene when it comes to our mental processes. If you look at Carl Jung's 8 different cognitive functions or 8 different mental processes, it seems that the two intuitive styles of mental processes seem to be the newest, all right? They're the ones that are least understood. They're the ones that are still trying to adapt to the social ecology. They're the ones that don't get a lot of space given. And so that intuitive style, that sort of brand new mental technology, what it looks like happened is that it evolved as sort of a back of your head voice that said, everything's quiet on the Serengeti, but I think there might be predators around. And I'm not sure why. I have no idea why. I don't have any specific thing that's telling me why or anything that I can point to, but I think that there might be predators around here. And so the person that had that little voice in the back of their head that said, I think there might be predators around, they walk softer on the plane at that moment because there might be predators. Now, that's the very beginning of that intuitive process. That's like the very, very, very earliest example of how that intuitive process worked. However, over time, there were individuals that heard that voice and went, that's an interesting voice. I wonder what that is. And started giving attention to it, started focusing on it, started asking themselves if there was other context in which that could be applied. And so over time, there were people who started to favor that preference because they were giving it focus. They were giving it time to evolve. They were giving it some real attention, not just having it be a voice that says, tread lightly, there might be predators. So because there was more attention given to that process, now suddenly people became intuitive dominant, as in that was the voice they were mostly listening to. And then in early times, you can see that through, the shamans of old or the mages in early cultures. You can see those guys becoming sort of a different breed. And in early cultures, because those guys were special and unique, there was an honor given to them. And at the same time, there was also a certain level of persecution given to them as well. Some cultures honored them and made them like wise men, and other cultures put them to death because they didn't know where that voice was coming. And the person themselves didn't know where that voice was coming. It seems like intuition is something that we end up, it sort of seems to run in families. It seems to be a bit genetic. And so suddenly you're born into this world and you're an intuitive and you naturally, automatically, not consciously make the choice to give that more attention and precedence. You just naturally do. And if you're in a context that doesn't understand why you're doing that, you don't even understand why you're doing it. It's a situation where somebody thinks that God is talking to them. Some religions have been built around people having this intuitive preference and not really understanding where it came from and trying to give it explanations. But that said, that push-pull relationship between people who favor the intuitive process and others that don't, that dynamic has been playing out as far back as we can remember, as far back as shamans entered the scene.
Yeah, and I think what Antonia said is really important is that everyone has intuition as part of their personality. It's that some people have put preference and attention on that, and that's a preferred way of learning information in the world. And we as humans we take our basic survival programming, and we seem to be able to take that like basic programming language and say, how can we use this beyond just survival? How can we use this to not only survive, but thrive and continue to evolve ourselves? And I think that's what she's saying. That seems to be how it possibly could have played out, to where everyone has this thing of intuition. But the people who put preference on that can over time grow it. And now we see intuition popping up, I think, in a bigger way than probably ever in the history of the world. Yeah,
our speculation is that the numbers are going to grow, that we're in early times, and it feels like our advancing technology in sort of the physical, tangible sense, it's allowing for more creative jobs to come up. There's a book called Rise of the Creative Class that indicates, that a lot of these menial jobs are going to go to like robots and we're going to have to do more thinking jobs, more creative jobs, and those are the ones who are going to be favored. So it seems that, at least in developed countries, we're giving more and more precedence to people who are intuitive, which is unusual, right? It's unusual in the history of humanity, unless you're going way back to the old cultures that were giving shamans precedent. So we're seeing intuition kind of rise up in a way that we've never seen before. Now, what's interesting is that this dynamic's been playing out forever, but we've only really started putting language around it for about 100 years. All right. So we're using language that developed around the time of Carl Jung. Carl Jung came up with this concept of what intuition is, which we're going to define more granularly in just a moment. And he came up with this concept. And so this concept of like an intuitive person versus another style of person, that's really new. That language is super new. And so we're only beginning to really understand what that means, form language around it to be able to sort of measure what that could, measure its impact in society, really kind of understand what that means to us as individuals, identify with it, kind of get it on a bigger level. And that's even newer than the intuitive process. The intuitive process has been around for a while, even if it was sort of behind the scenes and only sort of surfacing, really coming up over the last maybe 10,000, 15,000 years. But language for it, identifying what that is, as opposed to just creating poetry around it or just talking about like interesting people, but actually defining it and putting like language around it, that's about 100 years or less. Yeah. Right? So we're talking about brand new territory. We're talking about breaking new ground in a way that allows people to understand what this is and accept it for themselves and then be able to communicate it to other people.
Yeah, and I think part of this, I think anytime you see something grow, things don't grow in a vacuum. And the more people, because we have technology like this program you're watching right now, we have technology to communicate these things, and we have the ability for you to communicate with other people of like minds. Maybe people in your town aren't intuitive, but you can communicate with people all over the planet now. Mm-hmm. This is now giving us the ability to, hey, I think this way, you think this way too, mm-hmm. and now we can start cross-pollinating ideas. And so this idea of intuition and this intuitive awakening happening at your personal level, but like Antonia said, also at this macro level on a global scale, is more possible now than ever before because of technology that probably was invented by intuitives mm-hmm. at times past. So you're standing on the shoulders of giants as you go through this awakening. People have been there before when they didn't have this technology, and they still exercised their intuition. They still had an intuitive awakening, even if they didn't have language for it. Mm-hmm. So it's a really exciting time to be alive, a really exciting time to be an intuitive, and I think it's cool in all those ways.
I want to repeat what you just said because I think I think it can't be underplayed.
Okay.
Intuitive awakenings are not just for us as individuals. All right. Yeah. The intuitive awakening that we're talking about is not just for you as an intuitive. It starts there. And it starts on a micro level. I'm going to get this right this time. I'm going to say micro, macro in the right order. It starts on a micro level, for sure. That's the first place that an intuitive awakening happens. However, if every intuitive has an intuitive awakening, then cultures, society, people around us who are not intuitive, they won't be able to help but acknowledge it. All right. They won't be able to help but maybe even not understand it, but recognize its existence and understand that it's there. Yeah. So the intuitive awakening that we're talking about is also on a macro level. It's also on a societal level. All right. It's not just your individual intuitive awakening. It starts there. But then it unfolds to everybody. Everybody gets an intuitive awakening in the sense where they go, huh, those people are different than me. I wonder why they're different. I wonder how they're different, as opposed to demonizing it or calling it wrong or giving a child medication or whatever, saying somebody's broken.
Yeah.
The intuitive awakening that we're speaking of extends out to everybody, even if they're not intuitive. So that's what we're talking about by intuitive awakening. But again, it starts with the individual. It starts with us as individuals.
And how that might look, just for like an example, like a base kind of example of how this could look, and you've actually come up with this concept, is, there's that kid in the elementary school who's in 3rd grade who is just bored out of his mind, maybe acting up, and they give him a test and he tests off the charts like he's in high school. And the public consciousness, whether or not someone is aware of the detail of how this looks, is that kid might be a genius. He might be intelligent. So they give him an IQ test, and sure enough, he's got a high IQ. And so it's in the public consciousness of someone who has a high IQ. It's not that the kid's broken or he's misbehaving. He's just very intelligent, and they've given him an IQ test. And we have this word, or this terminology, IQ test, in our public vernacular. We think about this, and even people who don't have a high IQ think about people that have a high IQ or IQ measurements. Or
the opposite direction. If you run into somebody who's not very smart,
Yeah.
You think they have a low IQ. Yeah. So the word IQ, though.
But can you imagine a world where, as an intuitive, they have language. People that aren't intuitive or, don't really understand, they at least have some type of language to say, oh, that person's not broken. That person's not just being a weirdo for the sake of being a weirdo. Maybe they're intuitive. Maybe that 3rd grader is just intuitive. He's not weird or different. And that's something, as an intuitive awakening happens worldwide, we could see that becoming part of the public consciousness, and people opening their eyes, even if they're not intuitives, to say, oh, wow, this is cool. I see, I get it a little bit. I understand this. And so what Antonia is saying is this is for everybody, intuitives and not intuitives. This awakening is on a big, grand scale.
Yeah, it's meant to be put into the social consciousness,
just
like IQs are. And there's a theory that if we don't have a word for something, it doesn't exist. There's a word, I don't remember what the word is, but there's a word in...
Does it also work if we do have a word? It does. Chupacabra?
Yeah, and now chupacabras exist.
Dragons.
Yeah. So there's an emotion that certain cultures have, which is like like after love ends, this feeling of love continuing on, or the memory of that love continuing on. And there's an entire culture that has created, or excuse me, there's a culture that's created an entire genre of music around this one emotion that Americans, or at least people who speak English, so of course that's more than Americans, anybody in the English-speaking world, they don't have a word for that, much less an entire genre of music. So we don't really feel that or experience that emotion. In fact, it's really difficult for us to understand exactly what that emotion is. Is it maudlin? Is it remembering? Is it sadness?
Nostalgia.
Is it nostalgia? Is it happiness? Is it, what is it? And the people in that language will say, yeah, it's all of those, right? It's all of those and something extra.
Yeah.
When we don't have language for something, it's really difficult for us to even acknowledge that it exists. Once we have a word for it, though, right? Now we can internalize it. Now we get it, right? Now we can understand what that is. So this intuitive awakening is designed mostly to give language to something that's been languageless. And as an individual person, getting language around these concepts, getting language around who you are, what's been going on inside you, one of the primary things that we're going to be doing throughout this entire program is giving you language for things so that you can identify them. You can recognize them as real, so that you can integrate them, and so that you have not a defensive strategy, but an assertive strategy to be able to enter the world with this understanding. So that's a major piece of what we'll be doing. And so that's the intuitive part. And we've talked about the awakening part, not just for yourself, but also for society. But this is very much going to be like that moment when Morpheus types to Neo, "Wake up, Neo," right? Like there's a whole world going on. There's a bunch of stuff happening under the surface. And it's been happening for a really, really long time. And most of us don't even see it because we don't have language for it. But that said, it's time to wake up. All right? It's time to wake up and acknowledge what it means to be an intuitive. So one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to share our personal stories of our personal intuitive awakening. And we feel like we're not, I mean, neither of us feel particularly special. Like, this is an incredible, amazing thing that happened, you know, from other people's perspectives, but it was an incredible, amazing thing that happened to us as individuals. Yeah. And so if you can get an example of what an intuitive awakening looks like and some of the results that can happen from it, and some of the results that can happen when you don't have it yet, then it might help bust through something, might help shake something loose inside you to kind of go, okay, so how's my intuitive awakening going to look, right? Yeah. Like, how is it going to be expressed in me?
Well, and as we go through this intuitive awakening, as you're embodying this, stories are powerful. We're going to be talking about a lot of really data-heavy things in this program. We're going to be going into really specific frameworks and models of how to understand personality type and how to understand your intuition with your personality type and all this different stuff. But if we want to create a tipping point, if we want to create a true awakening in the world, and if you're on board with that idea, your personal story will be at the heart of your soul, of your heart, your mind. It's going to resonate with people more than anything else you tell them. You could sit down for an hour and tell them about personality types and about the technical definition of intuition and all this stuff. But your story, so start thinking about crafting your own story, and it's going to evolve over time because you're an evolving person, you're dynamic, but your story is going to be powerful in communicating to other people. And so as we tell our stories, we're just going to kind of give you a sense of where we've been and what we've come through. Think about your own story and about how powerful some of those elements will be for communicating to other people in your life.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. It is true. When you're attempting to communicate with another person, being able to encapsulate your story will be one of the most powerful pieces of, again, we use the word technology. I don't want to use the word, I was going to say weapon, but I don't want to say the word weapon because it's not really a weapon. Yeah. It's more like, it's a tool.
It's a tool.
Yeah, it'll be one of the strongest tools you have for expressing it to another person. So that said, before we launch into our stories, if you look at your intuitive awakening action plan, it looks like this. All right. At the bottom of the second page,
it might be a little different if you're watching the recording later because we might have moved a couple things, but look for the section she's going to talk about.
Right. So it's going to possibly look like that. Probably. The question is what I most desire from my intuitive awakening. And we're going to ask that question later at the end of this first session. So I want you to be thinking about that. What is the thing that you want to be getting from your intuitive awakening? And you don't have to write it down right now. Just kind of have it sort of be processing in the background of your mind and really ask yourself, what do you hope as your major takeaway from your intuitive awakening? All right. So that said, would you like me to start?
I don't care.
I can start.
That's great.
So, Joel's and my stories are somewhat similar. We have somewhat similar backgrounds, which is, I think, one of the things that really attracted us to each other and really helped us gel because we've had so many similar experiences. But my particular intuitive awakening happened gradually over time. And I think that that's very, very, very common. I think some people have an epiphany. Some people are introduced to the concept and just feel like they've been like smacked across the face. And they go, holy crap, this is a whole new world that I never thought of. But mine happened slowly. Mine happened over the course of about 15 years. So the first moment I can remember even getting the concept of intuition is I read a book on Myers-Briggs called Please Understand Me by David Kiersey. And it was just your basic Myers-Briggs book. In fact, I think it's probably the most famous of all Myers-Briggs books. It made Myers-Briggs, or at least personality typology, very accessible. I think that's why it became such a huge bestseller. And one of the reasons why the concept of Myers-Briggs, that personality psychology system, is in the public consciousness as much as it is now. I give a lot of credit to that particular book. And my mom had it. I was 15. My mom had it. I was used to just going and pulling books off of her shelf because my mom happens to be an intuitive as well. And so she had lots of books that I enjoyed reading. And I grabbed that one and I did the test and I came out as the wrong personality type, quote unquote, the wrong one. But one of the things that was spot on is it said that I was an intuitive and explained what intuition was. And I was absolutely, completely rendered speechless, which is difficult for me because here was an explanation for everything that I had been going through. And I was like an off the charts geeky kid in high school. I was the one who hated to take lunch in the cafeteria because I hated having to choose a table and sit by somebody, right? Is somebody going to reject me? Are they going to accept me at their table? I used to play Dungeons and Dragons, like with kids behind the gym. And in retrospect, I realized that I was actually less hated than I thought I was, but at the time I felt so persecuted. And that's a very common experience for a lot of teenagers just in general. That's not exclusive to intuitives by any stretch of the imagination. But intuitives have a tendency to feel even more alien than other types because they also have this other thing that they're trying to contend with. And that was totally me. So I read this description of intuition and I'm like, wow, okay, so that's what's been going on. And I instantly get in love with typology and Myers-Briggs, and I believe I'm an expert instantly, which is usually pretty common for people who learn typology. And I just typed everybody, right? I was typing my mom, I typed her wrong. I typed my brother, I typed him wrong. I typed my dad, I typed him wrong, right? My sister, I think my sister is the only person who I got right. But I was typing everybody and really trying to understand who they were based on this typology system. And so I thought I knew, right? Like I was like, I have this stuff down. I totally get what this, what's going on here. And so in the back of my head, I always say that I was making love to this idea, right? I've always been making love to the idea of, intuitives versus sensors. And then adulthood hit. And the style of intuition that I use, in fact, my driver process, and for the record, it's really good to have your particular genius style assessment, your profile in front of you. So I'm just going to say a little timeout from my personal story. If you've got that in front of you, awesome. Try to reference it a lot. And we're going to be mentioning comments or phrases like driver process. If you've got your genius style assessment in front of you, you can reference what your driver process is in the assessment. So my driver process is an intuitive process. It's called exploration. And that means that I have to be exploring. I have to. It's a part of who I am. If I'm not exploring, I start to get extremely depressed and I just sort of close in on myself. And I grew up in I grew up in what almost everybody that I've ever interacted with has defined as a cult. All right. So I grew up in an extremely religious family that is considered a cult by almost everybody except for the people within that religion. And because it was so stringent and so locked down and so unyielding to different perspectives, then I was quite limited in just how much exploration I could do. But I always found some place to explore. I always found some wiggle room. And a big part of why I think I was okay was because I had my whole life ahead of me, right? I was a teenager. I had my whole life ahead of me. Who I was going to marry was still a big question mark. What I was going to do ambition-wise was still a big question mark. So I had a lot of exploration sort of still there. And then I got married at a very young age to my first husband. It was, I know for a fact I was 19 when I got married the first time. And within 2 months, I went into a massively deep depression. Like horrible, like couldn't get my life together. Went and sought medication. I went and got on Zoloft. I just collapsed in on myself and I didn't understand why. I couldn't figure out why. Like, why am I so depressed? Well, my mom has always been depressed. My grandmother was always depressed. A lot of the women in my family have this narrative of depression, like the women are depressed. So I thought, okay, well, I'm just like the women in my family. I'm just going to be massively depressed. But unlike the other women in my family who are all more introverted and are more internalized with their pain, I'm a total mistake of commission kind of person, right? I'm exploration, right? So I'm just like, I am projecting my depression outward. And so I was basically the Tasmanian devil in everything I touched. I went and destroyed everything I could possibly get my hands on because I was miserably unhappy. In retrospect, I realized it's because when I was young in this religion, I had my whole life ahead of me. But once I got married, I knew that the last free choice I had to make was done. All right, like that was it. Like I just got my last choice. And I knew from this point on, I was going to be locked in and there was going to be no wiggle room and I was going to be able to explore nothing, maybe explore around the world. But part of the religion I was in is that you're not supposed to make a lot of money because that shows that you're married to the world. So I wasn't supposed to make a lot of money. I wasn't supposed to pursue a career because that was part of the religion as well, is that you didn't want to give yourself over to the world. I wasn't supposed to get higher education because that would just mentally mess with me and get me out of my religion. So pretty much like everything that I would have done was considered verboten. And again, all I had was that marriage. And that was it. And I'm a female. There's a cap to what I could do within that religion, and it was over. Like, that was it. I was going to have to do the same thing that I had been doing my entire life. I was going to have to just play that out for the rest of my life. And so there was nothing left for me, and I just closed in. Well, again, exploration. So I just started doing things sneaky, right? I would go explore, but because it was so self-destructive, I ended up getting into alcohol really hardcore, right? Of course, always on the down low, never let anybody know. And I was drinking like crazy. I was drinking like a fish throughout my early mid-20s. Alcohol was allowed in my religion, but drunkenness was looked down on. So I would always like kind of skirt the edge or not letting anybody know if I had gotten drunk. I didn't technically go out on my husband, but I definitely pursued a lot of like online relationships, right? Like, so I'd like get in chat rooms and I would go try to find people who I could chat with and develop like sort of these emotional connections with other men outside of my marriage. And that kept things kind of interesting for a while. Some guy hit on me, and as soon as he hit on me, I thought, oh, this is the love of my life. And so I formed an emotional, adulterous relationship with this person. And I just kept doing that. Like, I kept just doing really crappy things to my first husband. I kept doing really crappy things in my life, and I was just absolutely miserable. And then I learned cognitive functions, right? Then I learned, these concepts of mental processes. And I learned that I was an exploration person, and I learned that I was exploration driver, and my whole world opened up to me. I realized why I was doing all the really crappy things that I was doing. And then I also learned that I was accuracy co-pilot, which in the system I learned it's called introverted thinking. And so I started really getting involved in rational thinking. I got involved in debate courses. I got involved in logic. I started doing some really kind of hardcore math. I was really getting into philosophy. And I started to recognize that the religion that I was in had created such sort of a mental vice on me that my driver process absolutely could not tolerate, right? It just couldn't tolerate it anymore. And so I made the absolutely devastatingly destructive choice to leave the religion of my youth. And one of the reasons why I hadn't done it sooner is because I knew when I did it, it was going to be a ripple effect that I couldn't come back from. And my family stopped talking to me. All of my closest friends, I had a very strong tribe of friends. All of them stopped talking to me. And I basically lost everything. I ended up losing my marriage in the process, my first marriage. And I went from having a thriving social network of people who would do anything for me to having absolutely nothing but me in my suitcase. And that was the choice I had to make. I had to make that because the context that I was in was totally suppressing my driver process, and I couldn't tolerate it anymore. So that was the moment I had my authentic intuitive awakening. That was the moment when I went, okay, so I can't live that life anymore. There was like this mushroom cloud of destruction behind me that like my body cast a silhouette against. It was like, all right, that's done. So now what am I going to do? And I just sat down and went, look, I don't work like other people. I know I'm intuitive. I've known that my whole time, this whole time. And I've just got to make a life for myself. So I started getting into internet marketing. I started attending seminars and courses with other, like basically that was very intuitive heavy. I started cross-pollinating ideas and concepts, and I decided to co-create a business around personality psychology. And the reason why I call that my intuitive awakening is because I didn't have a degree in it, right? Like I had gone to school to be a radiologist. Like this was not something that I had a degree in. Yeah. And so I just did it anyway. And I just decided that the world was going to mold to me. And 4 years later, my life it's like 180 degrees difference. I met the person that I was intended to be with the entire time, I believe. I've had a child since then that has been challenging because I'm not naturally that style, but I can't imagine my life any other way. And I have a business around the subject that I love. And not only do I have a business around the subject that I love, but I have a mission that I'm on. I have a mission of encouraging other intuitives to wake up. So again, I don't know if that's an interesting or uninteresting story, but that was my intuitive awakening. It started at 15 years old and it didn't end until I was 30. I didn't leave the religion of my youth until I was 30 years old. It took me that long to unplug. And when it happened, my life was radically different. Now, I'm not trying to indicate to anybody that your intuitive awakening will include the ending of your religious affiliation, all right? I'm not trying to indicate that you are going to have to leave your family and friends behind and or they will divorce you from their lives like mine did. I'm trying to indicate that. But I am trying to indicate that there are certain cultures and societies that are under the umbrella of family, or under the umbrella of religion, or under the umbrella of patriotism, or whatever it is. It doesn't matter what institution it is. that are not very accepting of intuitive choices. So they do what they can to stamp it down. And part of intuitive awakening is recognizing that that's not really an option for you. All right? It's not really an option to just stamp it down. It's not really an option to do that if you don't want to be depressed for the rest of your life. That's not really an option for you. So part of what we're trying to shake loose for you is that you're going to have to make some tough choices. Maybe you have a context that's very open and very accepting of your intuition, and that's awesome. And most of us don't have that. All right. Most of us are not in a context that's fully accepting. Otherwise, we'd have already had our awakening. So that's the big piece of my personal narrative, is that sometimes it has to be devastating. Sometimes it has to be a mushroom cloud behind you. Most of the time that's not necessary, but in my case it was. And I couldn't be happier about my decisions. I couldn't be happier. I hate that I don't have a relationship with my parents, but I could not be happier about my decision to graduate into my intuitive awakening.
I think by the way, thank you for that story. That's a powerful story. And I think that as Antonia's talking, I'm sitting here listening to what she's saying. And the truth is that your intuitive awakening is not one moment in your life. It is going to be something that is a process for you. It's a journey of sorts. And the reason I say that is because mine isn't as specifically defined to one pinpointed time period. There are defining moments. And I think Antonia has a defining moment, but Antonia is still awakening to her intuition, right? Would you agree? I mean,
oh yeah, totally.
I'm still awakening to mine. And as we continue to move through life, we're going to be much different intuitives at the age of 80 than we are today in our 30s. So it's a much different experience if you think of it as the long game than just one moment. Now, when you get language for it, we're talking about intuitive awakening. When you get language for it, that defining moment of the language of, oh, I'm an intuitive, and this is what it means to be an intuitive, that is one of those defining moments that could be one of those pinpoint times in your life. But it doesn't necessarily have to be this epic, like she said, where you leave everything behind and now you're out in the world just floating freeform. It can be a process and a gradual process and something that you work on throughout your entire experience. And so that's kind of been my story, has been a process. Growing up, I grew up in much more of a mainstream religious context. It was a mainline, kind of religious experience, like most people probably in the United States that grow up, or in a Western, traditionally Christian society grow up in. And it was something that was very much a part of my life, to the core identity of who I am and who my family is. My family's very involved in our spiritual practice, our religious practice growing up. And so that was much part of my experience as I grew up in life. And because of that, I would go through life and I realized that I thought a little differently at a very young age. I remember having conversations with my mother, who's also intuitive, and saying, I think about things in a different way, and I don't understand. I don't think I'm smarter than everybody else, but I'm getting things that other people aren't getting. What's going on? What is happening in my life that I have this perspective? I have, at the age of 6, 7, 8, I understood things about the world that other adults didn't even understand. How is this possible at the age of 7, 8 years old? And it was baffling to me as I grew up. And I went into my teenage years, and I wasn't as much of the geek in high school. I was homeschooled, so I went through a very different, radically different schooling experience than most people went through. So I was a little different in that way, which also complicated being into it. But I was popular. I did have a social network of friends, and a lot of people liked me. I was very popular. But I didn't care because I didn't have anything in common with most of these people. They just thought so boring thoughts to me. And I say that now as that person thinking back then. I don't think of them as boring now. I think of them as great people. I don't say that in a derogatory way. But at the time I was like, man, I just don't get along with most people. I feel like I have nothing in common. And so what I did as a coping strategy, I have this ability to very much blend in with whoever I'm with as a chameleon. I can kind of embody the social graces or the kind of the way of moving through the world that people around me embrace. And so I got really good at what we've talked about before, which is this idea of blending. Mm-hmm. And pretty much having one-sided relationships with everyone in my life. I didn't have very much intimacy. I didn't have close friends. I had a lot of friends, but none of them were intimates. None of them were close. I didn't really date in high school or enter into romantic relationships. I guarded my heart. I guarded my spirit. I guarded my soul. And I didn't open myself up. And I think it was because I felt like if I opened myself up during that time period, I would be fundamentally misunderstood. And so I thought, what the world wants from me, instead of my authentic, true Joel self, they want me to perform for them. They want me just to match how they're being. They want to talk about the things they're talking about. And I'll just go ahead and play that game. And I played it very, very well throughout my entire teen years, through college, my college experience, and into my 20s. I was a blender. I was a pretender. I was not my true, authentic self. And as I grew and as I got into my 20s, I got married at a young age. My first marriage was to a person it just didn't work out with. We had some struggles and some difficulties. And we kind of knew that, or at least I knew it very early on in the marriage. But because of my religious upbringing, I felt like it was my responsibility, not only to a commitment I had made, but also to the faith background and the religious background I'd come to really stand strong for this institution of marriage. And so I really tried to stick with it and make it work, even though I was pretty sure it wasn't going to work out. And in the midst of that, I had 2 children in that marriage. And as that was going on, I ended up moving to another city away from my family. And I thought, my way out, my ticket out, instead of being my true authentic self and just coming out and trying to organize my life to who I was authentically, I thought, I'm going to get into business. I'm going to make enough money in business where it won't matter, because then I can really be authentic. Once I achieve my business goals and I have money, then if I'm authentic and people don't like it, I'll at least have enough money in the bank to support myself if people pull away from me or they think I'm a weirdo or whatever. So that'll be my first step. And so in the midst of that, I began to explore the possibility of running an online internet business. And I would go to seminars and different conferences around business. And as I went, I heard some of the people that were at these conferences talking about other things, other types of conferences they were involved in. And these were things around the mind and how the mind worked and how personality psychology worked and how, different types of mindsets. And in fact, one of the things I was very interested in at that time was neuro-linguistic programming, being able to understand the programming language of your mind enough to be able to go into your own mind and rephrase things in the way you think about things in order to change your life and better your life. And so I remember studying this a little bit and taking a few online classes, and actually ended up going to a live conference learning about neuro-linguistic programming and some of these mind technologies. And when I got to that conference, I was exposed to a tribe of people who thought like I did, who were interested in the same types of mental kind of concepts and weird things that I was interested in. And it opened up my eyes to an entire world of people who do think this way. And I didn't have language for it at the time. I didn't have this idea of intuition, but I remember thinking at the time, this is incredible. There are people around in this world that think like I do. And because I had grown up in a very limited perspective, I didn't understand this. And I was really excited to meet some of these people and realize that this is what was happening. And then in the midst of that, I understood a little bit more about personality typology. I read about intuition, and I understood, because intuition for me had always been something that women had, women's intuition, or something that was kind of like a gut level thing or like a spiritual practice or something. But realizing that it's an actual personality style of learning was very impactful for me. And so I began to say, wow, it's not just something that I have, but it's something that I can actually develop and embrace and use. This is crazy. And so that kind of really began the language around my intuitive. I'd say it started before that, with really trying to find solutions and answers to my life and some of the blending I'd done and some of the feeling like I wasn't being my authentic true self. But that language of that intuition was what really sparked that. And I'm still in the middle of my journey. I think that, my framework, unlike Antonia's, isn't that I'm going to have to make a decision at some point, because my religion and my background doesn't give me this line in the sand of you have to leave everything. You can be a little bit more self-expressive in the way I grew up. And so I'm still in the process of awakening intuition. Obviously, I'm further along than I was years ago, but this is definitely a process, and it's going to be a process for you. There might be defining moments when you're awakened to the vernacular we're using, or you might have to leave a marriage that isn't working or a religion that isn't working. That's not necessarily the case, but that might happen for you. Each person's different. Each person has their own unique defining moments. And those defining moments are what send you off on trajectories of your life. And so that's kind of my experience and where I've been. And since, obviously, you're watching this program, we own an internet business. One of my dreams from many years ago to have an online business. I have 3 children now, 2 with my previous wife, and obviously one now with Antonia, and she's a beautiful little baby that we absolutely love and we're watching grow up and we're excited about. And is that because I awakened my intuition? Did all that good stuff happen to me because? Yes and no. There were other things in my life that I built skill around, obviously, business and other things, and I've been developing myself in all sorts of ways. But that intuition, I believe, awakening to it, was a catalyst for making radical changes on how I view reality, how I view the world, and how I'm making myself and my way in the world going forward. So it's been a very powerful experience for me. And just like Antonia said, this is near and dear to our hearts. Personally, as Antonia and Joel, and publicly as Personality Hacker and the people who represent Personality Hacker, we want to see this happen for you. And whatever that defining moment is for you or defining moments are for you, and whatever that means in your particular context, we want to see your intuition awakened to your greatest potential.
Yeah, well, for me, it absolutely was necessary.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't have this life if I hadn't had an intuitive awakening. My happiness is directly linked with my intuitive awakening. I was so depressed and closing in on myself. I think that that's probably one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about this. Because I know there's a lot of people out there who are collapsing in on who they are because they haven't awakened this piece of themselves. So, yeah, I think that it doesn't have to be this incredibly epic, tale like I have. It's probably going to be more subtle, closer to Joel's story. However, regardless of how it looks, however you end up going through it, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
All right. The way out is through, and the other side holds treasures that you can't possibly understand or experience until you have this moment of awakening to it and giving yourself permission to be intuitive.
A couple things I just wrote a couple notes as you were talking that I wanted to say. One of the things that struck me is oftentimes those defining moments of awakening your intuition come from a pain in your life. And for me, it was kind of being in this experience of being in a marriage that I knew wasn't going to work out. And also seeing that I wanted to do different things with I had a day job basically behind a cubicle, and I wanted to be doing something different. And the pain of that got to be great enough that I took action to make a change in my life. And I think that would probably, you'd say the same thing for yourself.
Oh, totally, yeah.
So you're probably, the intuitive awakening that you're having is probably as a result of some kind of pain. And the other thing I would say is that this can happen at a young age, but I would say that age does probably play a part in this. As you age and you get older, you oftentimes are like, I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of just blending in. I'm tired of not being my true self. And you might have this, the realization for me, I will say there was a defining moment. It was the realization that, oh yeah, regardless of whatever our views are of the afterlife that you're watching this, or personal views, this is the one life we get. And I think that was a defining moment for me to say, do I really want to be living this life I'm living, or do I want to express myself authentically? And so I think as you get older, you get sick and tired, basically. You get sick and tired of the pain points in your life, and you're like, I need to make a change. And you also get a perspective of, wow, my mortality, the end of my life is going to come someday. And is this the life I want to be living, or is it something different? And I think those two things kind of in tandem work together to create that momentum, that desire to want to switch something, to want to turn on a switch and really awaken that for yourself.
So I'm going to ask the